had made their contribution to the national myth.
Characteristically, perhaps the most valuable part of the Fenian contribution to the myth took place here in Manchester several months after the rising itself had ended in debacle. The Irish-American veteran, Colonel Kelly, now Chief Executive of the Irish Republic, had remained in England undetected in spite of a very intensive search for him. Then, on the 11th of September 1867, the police arrested two men here in Manchester acting suspiciously in a doorway. They gave their names as Wright and Williams, and they were charged with loitering. But on being put in front of the informer Corridon, they were immediately recognized as a Captain Deasy, who'd been active in County Cork during the Rising, and no less than the Chief Executive of the Irish Republic himself, Colonel T.J. Kelly. A week later, the most important Fenian action of the year was fought here on the streets of Manchester. As an unescorted prison van conveying Kelly and Deasy in handcuffs from the police court to Bellevue Jail came through a railway arch, it was stopped and surrounded by about 30 Fenians who'd been lying in wait for it, some of them armed with revolvers. These forced the unarmed police on the outside of the van to get down and kept onlookers at bay while the others tried to batter open the van and rescue Kelly and Deasy from the cells inside. Inside the van with the two Fenian prisoners was a police sergeant named Brett, who, called upon through the ventilator to surrender, refused to do so. Whereupon one Fenian, aware that help for the beleaguered sergeant would soon be on the way, fired his revolver through the ventilator, although whether with intent to kill or frighten the sergeant or simply blast open the lock of the door, we'll never now know. What we do know is that the bullet mortally wounded Sergeant Brett. One of the women criminals was so frightened that she took the keys out of the hands of the dying sergeant and passed them through the ventilator. A minute later, Kelly and Deasy were free, climbing over a wall and across a railway line, and they were never recaptured. It was the sequel to the Manchester rescue that was to be all-important to the future.
Charged with the murder of Sergeant Brett and taken in a prison van, accompanied by an understandably heavy police escort for trial, were 5 Irishmen. All 5 were found guilty of murder, and after the death sentence, one cried from the dock, "God save Ireland," and they all repeated that. But the English public were outraged by what they saw as the murder of Brett, and his funeral in Manchester was an imposing affair. 3 of the Irishmen found guilty were executed. 2 were reprieved. Those executed, Allen, Larkin, and O'Brien. They were executed on a foggy morning in November 1867, and the atmosphere around the scaffold was so tense, with soldiers of the 72nd Highlanders placed round it, that when 2 explosions were heard nearby, the soldiers got ready to use their arms. But it was only the detonation of 2 fog signals on the railway line. Allen, Larkin, and O'Brien had all been present at the attack on the van, but none had fired the fatal shot. And because of that, and because few people in Ireland believed that Sergeant Brett's death had been anything but a justifiable accident, Allen, Larkin, and O'Brien have gone down to history as the Manchester Martyrs.
Some died by the glen side, some died with the stranger, and wise men have told us their cause was a failure, but they stood by old Ireland stand and never fear danger. Glory, oh, to the bold Fenian men. I passed on my way, God be praised.
Great mourning processions for the executed men, sometimes known as mock funerals with their empty hearses and full mourning array, were held in the cities of Ireland.
We may have great men, but we'll never have better. Glory, oh, to the bold Fenian men.
But that was by no means the end of the story. One afternoon at Westminster, 10 years later, a debate on Irish affairs was taking place in the House of Commons when a minister of the Crown, the Chief Secretary for Ireland, made a slighting reference to the Manchester murderers.
No!
This interruption took the minister aback. He said he was sorry anyone in that house should apologize for murder.
The right honourable gentleman looked at me so directly when he said that he regretted that any member of this house should apologize for murder, that I wish to say as publicly and directly as I can that I do not believe and never shall believe that any murder was committed at Manchester.
That Irish Member of Parliament was Charles Stewart Parnell. Within a few years, he was to advance the Irish national cause to the very forefront of British politics. O'Connell Street, Dublin, named after one great parliamentary Irish nationalist, Daniel O'Connell. At the end of it, the statue of another, Charles Stewart Parnell, who, while working only for Home Rule under the British Crown, also once said this:
No man has a right to fix the boundary to the march of a nation. No man has a right to say to his country, thus far shalt thou go and no further.
No man ever disturbed British democratic politics so profoundly as Charles Stewart Parnell. In the 1880s, no British Prime Minister could rule without considering how Parnell might exercise his power. He raised Irish national feeling to the most effective level it had yet achieved. His rise had been meteoric, his fall was equally so. Overnight, he lost his power after one of the greatest sexual scandals in the history of politics. For he'd fallen in love with Catherine O'Shea, wife of an Irish Member of Parliament, who eventually divorced her after a sensational public hearing before judge and jury. This is Parnell's and Ireland's story at a turning point in the history of Irish nationalism.